As the one-year anniversary of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation approaches, a new allegation of sexual misconduct in the book, The Education of Brett Kavanaugh, have renewed calls for his impeachment. But the book's authors are under a little bit of fire from critics who say they left out some crucial information. And they're here today to tell us what everyone's talking about. So please welcome Robin Pogrebin. Yes, I did it.
Pogrebin.
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 Yeah.
I tried.
It's okay.
I'll get it right at the end.
Happens all the time.
And Kate Kelly. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to The View.
Thank you.
We're going to get into the details of the book in a moment, but we just have to start out with the controversy that's making so many headlines right now. So I'm going to try and make this as clear as possible. The New York Times ran an excerpt of your book over the weekend in the opinions section that included a new allegation of sexual misconduct against Brett Kavanaugh. But you guys left out a key detail that the alleged victim, who you name by name in the book, but you're not going to name her here on the show, quote, refused to discuss the incident, and, quote, several of her friends said that they do not recall it happening.
She does.
So, yes, I'm sorry, that she doesn't recall it happening. I think this is sort of ground zero for why so many people mistrust the media, why the New York Times has the nickname for New York Slimes with many people in conservative circles. The Times actually had to run an editor's note following up. How did this vital fact get left out?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. We're eager to clear the air on this. First of all, there was no desire to withhold important information from our readers. We have all of it in the book, and the essay is an adaptation of the book that, of course, we had to edit for length and clarity. The thrust of the essay was about, probably a bad word choice, the point of the essay was about Deborah Ramirez, a woman who had gone to college with Justice Kavanaugh and had this experience where she alleged that he exposed himself to her, and it was a very troubling event. And we lay out all the reasons why that was, not just the moment itself, but the experience she was having at Yale being very difficult. Within that, we talked about this new, as yet unreported allegation because we thought it was germane. It was a similar type of situation to the Ramirez one. During the editing process, there was an oversight and this key detail about the fact that the woman herself has told friends she doesn't remember it and has not wanted to talk about it, got cut. And it was an oversight, and the Times adjusted it, and we're very sorry that it happened.
I understand that the woman didn't want her name out publicly. If not, why is her name in the book?
Her name is in the book because we think it's relevant information and we think it's accurate. And we know that her name was provided to members of the Senate and the FBI by a witness named Max Steyer, who is a good governance activist in Washington, who's a respected figure. And he had provided this name. The name is in documents. It's in a letter. Right? He did at one point, I understand, do work for Williams and Connolly.
Why wasn't that in the piece? Because that is, if we're talking about credibility.
Right. I understand. It's relevant background. In this case, it was a very short mention, and we only talked in brief terms about what he's doing right now. So we didn't see all of that context to be necessary. But I understand why you're bringing it up, and I think it's fair.
Well, you also sort of threw the New York Times opinion board under the bus a little bit, saying that they chose to omit it. I've written opinion pieces in the New York Times. In my experience, I get the final say on what runs. At least that's what happened with my recent. So where was the disconnect?
Well, we're
there?
a team at the New York Times. We have processes in place. We wrote this. It was edited. There was back and forth, as there always is. It's kind of a team effort, frankly, to make sure that everybody's comfortable with the final product. And there was just an oversight here. So
Did you guys just miss it? Did you miss that was so important? But you are the authors of the book. Did you just miss it?
It's in the book.
It's in the...
And we
No, miss it in the New York Times opinion piece.
And we first had it in the piece. And so it's about an editing process, which is iterative. It has a lot of different drafts. And, you know, I think actually the way it happened was the editors being concerned about naming her, because the Times has a tradition of not naming the victims and really has to deliberate whether or not to do that. In that sentence that had her name, it also had that she doesn't remember it. They took out the whole sentence. And in removing her name, in order to kind of protect her and make sure we weren't sort of sending people to her door, we also took out the fact that she didn't remember it.
Did you read it right before it went to print?
You know, we thought we had. Yeah, and as soon as we realized this, we corrected it. And they wrote an editor's note and they restored it.
But didn't you realize it because Molly Hemingway made the correction? And I just want to know blankly, can you understand why so many people think that this might be a hatchet
Yes, and I actually
job?
think, Megan, it's a good point, because the reason we did this book in the first place was that this was such an incredibly polarizing event in our country's history. Everyone saw in it what they wanted to see. It was used for political purposes at the time. It's being used again for
Yeah, we're
political
living out a
purposes
version
now.
of that right now.
Right now.
As
And
we-
this is writ large. I mean, people have seized on details in our book. The reason we did this was to revisit these events with 10 months of reporting, to give an in-depth portrait, frankly, to actually look more closely at Brett Kavanaugh and who he is, what kind of person he was as a young boy, you know, through high school, through college, what kind of professional he was, what were his 12 years on the court before he got to the court, and we actually found that he was, you know, we have found that we corroborate these stories of Deborah Ramirez and Christine Blasey Ford, but in the 36 years since, Brett Kavanaugh has been a better man. You know, whether he realized the error of his ways, and he consciously reformed himself, or he grew up and simply matured, he has been an exemplary judge. Everyone we talked to couldn't speak more highly of him on both sides of the aisle. And he actually has a much more nuanced view, kind of position on the court. He's not a right-wing ideologue either. He's actually an establishment conservative who has promoted women on the court. So that's something else we wanted to get across here, which is, you know, everybody can kind of demonize him, and everyone can kind of demonize these victims. And the reality is somewhere in between, considerably more complicated, considerably more nuanced, and that's what we're trying to portray in this book.
Yeah. Interesting. And it's well done, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I read
must
it
do
yesterday. ABC News spoke to this woman in the recent allegation outside her home. She told ABC she was not interested in speaking to reporters because she was involved in the reporting last year during the confirmation process, and she can't do it again. That's a quote. But when she was asked if there were other sources who could speak to this story, she told ABC, "All I can say is ask